All right, Bill, we're going to continue to widen the scope here a little bit. And we spent the first part of this show talking about Notre Dame specifically and where we saw them in the grand scheme of national rankings, where they're at as of today before spring practice kicks off. But now we're going to kind of broaden the scope and look at other title contenders across the country. And I don't know how you have done it, but it's kind of sorted out into three different groups. And I think that's a fair conversation because it's always, you have the teams off the bat, off the top of your head that we believe to be title contending teams. Talked about it a little bit in the first segment, the Texases, the Ohio States, the Notre Dames of the world, the Oregons, Penn States. Then you start getting into your, tier 2 group and then your tier 3 group. So walk me through starting out. You kind of have the regulars that are always there. Who are some of the regulars in your mind right now that are leading title contenders for this upcoming season?
Well, they play in week 1, Texas, Ohio State. I mean, Ohio State with the amount, Ohio State is, when you talk about national championship teams, certain programs are a little bulletproof. Ohio State's bulletproof to me in terms of they're going to have enough talent back on that roster to win a national title. I think the expectation is there'll be more bumps than last year, and there should be. I mean, they're going to have 13, 14, 15 guys drafted. And an article I need to do, Trevor, is we could rewind it back 5 years, okay? Who can truly say we don't rebuild, we reload? And Alabama could do that with Saban, where it was like, yeah, they're going to have a machine back. Georgia could do that 4 years ago. But I think once you have 13 guys go and then 12 guys go, and that's what hit them last year. Michigan had, double-digit guys go. Michigan can't sustain like that. You can't have 15 NFL players leave the roster at Michigan and then expect – and LSU had the same thing happen in 19, which is probably the best college football team I've ever seen that I can remember. You can say this team, Miami in the 2000s, sure. Notre Dame in the 70s, yeah, that's fine. LSU in 19 is the best team I've ever seen in person. And they lost a bunch of guys, and they couldn't sustain it. They lost potentially 3 Pro Football Hall of Famers in Jefferson, Chase, and Burrow. So how do they withstand that? Ohio State, I think there'll be more bumps than usual. But anytime you can base an offense around Jeremiah Smith and a defense around Caleb Downs, you do okay. Texas with Arch Manning, we're going to have a hard time controlling the hype for them. They did lose a lot of pieces, though. They lost receivers. They lost tackles. They lost, some key players on the defensive side of the ball. Who's he throwing to? You lost, Bond and your tight end and, the Kelvin Banks. So there are a lot of pieces at Texas to fill. But I do think Sarkisian has done a good job. It's very comparable to what Marcus is doing at Notre Dame, that he's young. I think he gets it. And he's not screwing up a program with a ton of resources. So I do like Sark. He faces a lot of criticism, I think, other than his goal line play calling against Ohio State last year. But, those are the two that stick out. Georgia coming back with what they have. Oregon, Notre Dame, and then Penn State's not a regular national championship contender for me. They are a very good team, but they still, like I said, I saw a couple of comments in here and I wanted to respond a little bit. I do think Penn State does face more pressure than Notre Dame. Notre Dame obviously still has a lot of pressure on the program, but Penn State's in that all-in year. Aller came back. Singleton came back. Allen came back. A couple defensive guys came back. So when you're doing all that, and they got Jim Knowles, by the way, and they play Ohio State. So the heat around that game is going to be off the charts next year. And I think that's the list of teams that I'm looking at right off the bat that I'm like, okay, if I'm picking a national champion, it'd probably be among one of those 6.
There are some teams in there, and I'm in the same boat as you are because we have very, very similar top 6s, top 7s. Like I said, my top 7 goes Penn State, Texas, Notre Dame, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Oregon. That's my top 7. So we have a lot of similar teams, almost identical teams to who we believe can be in contention to play for a national title. Penn State is almost in the situation that for different reasons, they're in a very similar situation to what Ohio State was going into this past year. James Franklin has kind of been, he's coined this reputation of being unable to win those big games. He fell short a little bit in the Big Ten championship game. Now, I will say Penn State did impress me in that loss in the Big Ten title game. I filed under the people that said, look, if this game turns into a shootout, it might turn into a boat race because that's Oregon's style of game.
Mm-hmm.
And Penn State was able to hang in there with them. They won 2 postseason games, but with some of the earlier postseason games, what I do is I kind of go back and I try to look at it from the frame of, if this were a regular season game, would I view it as big of a win, or am I looking at the stage as the bigger win, not the opponent? So, for example, a lot of people after Notre Dame beat Indiana, a lot of people were coining it as one of the biggest program wins in history since 1993. And it's like, well, hold on. IU had a really good season, but if they played on October 28th inside of Notre Dame Stadium, not in the first round of the playoffs, would we still view it as that, or would we just view it as like, okay, this was a good win?
Right.
And that's kind of how I viewed Penn State's couple rounds of the playoffs. Beating SMU at home. SMU is a really good team, but I don't think it was enough to get the monkey off of James Franklin's back of he can win the big one now. Because the big ones he faced last season, Ohio State at home, didn't win that. Oregon on a neutral site field in the Big Ten championship, didn't win that. And then Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl in the semifinals, and he didn't win that one either. So I'm in the same boat as you are with Penn State. They're in a similar boat with how much they have coming back to what I believed Ohio State did this past year. Everybody looked at Ohio State's roster like they're very experienced. They have the talent. Wide receiver skill position is going to be a question for me with Penn State, especially with them losing Tyler Warren, their best downfield passing weapon. But you look at Aller coming back. Andy Kotelnicki's going into his second year at offensive coordinator. They got Jim Knowles. They have both of their 1,000-yard backs coming back. I think this is a make or break year for them in that can they finally get through that threshold.
Well, and it's from the Big Ten slant, they just can't beat the Buckeyes, man. Trevor, they I've watched every way that they've lost to the Buckeyes since they beat them in 16 on a play where they probably should not have won. They block a field goal, Grant Haley runs it back, and that's their last win there. And then Michigan beating them the way that they have. Didn't play Michigan last year, didn't play them next year, or this year coming. They do play Oregon and Ohio State, and I think you bring up a good point. Those are the games in which he'll be judged. I was like, okay, yeah, you should beat SMU. You were impressive. You should beat Boise State. You were impressive. You should have beat Notre Dame, quite frankly. You were up 10-0 and running the ball like down their throat, and then they forgot how to run the ball in the second half. Great adjustments by Notre Dame in that game, by the way. But I do think there's some level of pressure on them. So they would be, I know we have them ranked number 4, but it's like, I need to see you do it. I would go down and say Clemson's a national championship contender. I could say that because I know, 1, they're probably going to win their conference. 2, they have Cade Klubnik, who I know we're going to, in that third, he has 36. It snuck up on me today. I was prepping for this podcast. Brian would be proud. Yes, I prepped. 36 touchdowns, 6 interceptions last year. Mm-hmm. I would have never guessed. If you'd have said ACC quarterback, 36 TD passes, 6 interceptions, I don't know if I'm guessing him first. I was trying to think. I would probably said like Cam Ward, Kyle McCord, somebody else. No, it's Cade Klubnik. He had really good numbers, and he played well in the playoffs. So I could rope them in there, and I'm not a Dabo hater like everybody else. I think he's done a fantastic job there. 5 years ago, I used to tell people what he's done at Clemson was the best story in college football in the last 50 years. To build them into a national championship like powerhouse that was going back, and they're still around. So I don't think Clemson's quite dead yet.
I'm with you. I was the lone. My claim to fame is I was the lone IB staffer that picked Clemson to win the ACC over SMU.
Good call.
Thank you. And it was one of those where I was like, look, at the end of the day, I like Clemson's talent, on-field talent. It's young. You have Peter Woods on the defensive line. Their receiving core was really young. Cade Klubnik had an up and down season up to that point. Statistically, he had a good year. But just in some of the bigger moments, it was just kind of, the Louisville game was kind of fresh in my mind of like, okay, that game just wasn't competitive. But then I started thinking about it, and it's like, look, Dabo Swinney is one of the most experienced coaches in all of college football. He is one of, until Ryan Day won the national championship, one of 2 active coaches with a national championship ring. Excuse me. And so when I was going through and I was thinking about it, I was like, look, Miami's had a fun season with Cam Ward. They've had question marks. They were closer to losing some games than they were to being 10-2 at the end of the regular season. The ACC still runs through Clemson. And that came to fruition in the ACC championship game. But I'm with you. I mean, even in the big moments, I mean, Cade Klubnik against SMU in the ACC championship game passed for 4 touchdowns, 262 yards. And then against Texas in a loss on the road, he passed for 336 and 3 touchdowns. And so that was my one pause with Cade Klubnik before the postseason was, can he perform in big games? Because earlier last year, they opened the season against Georgia, did not have a good performance. Against Louisville at home, not a good performance. Threw the ball 56 times that game. And then against South Carolina, not great passing. He rushed for 62 yards and 2 touchdowns. But I needed to see that big game performance from him, which gives me a lot of confidence coming into this season of what Clemson can do and make a run at the title.
Yeah, and it's funny. I went back and looked at my college conference championship predictions since you said that, and I had SMU winning 34-31. Well, Clemson won 34-31, so I was close. I just missed with the field goal the other way. Yeah, and I think they're a team that's kind of my cutoff point. Then you get into, okay, what's the next tier? And here's the next tier. And I know Brian's top 25 probably didn't have any SEC teams in it. Did he ban the SEC from his top 25? No. I will say that behind his back because I would say it to his face. I'd be like, how many did you ban the SEC? Because we've gone back and forth on that for years. I have like that SEC clump next, the Alabama, LSU, Florida's getting a lot of love. South Carolina with Lenora Sellers. I'm reading stories about him in the Heisman hype, but I think the SEC is a victim of, Trevor, that they don't maybe have a dominant team other than a Georgia, maybe, or a Texas, maybe. Alabama and LSU feel very boomer bust to me. Like they could go 9-4 again. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't be surprised. And that's something Brian is right about, that the quality there with the SEC, maybe there's not that dominant team. And then when they lose, we've got to hold them accountable for those losses, which we did last year. And we held Alabama accountable and South Carolina and Ole Miss. But, sorting out that second clump of SEC teams is pretty tough to do. And if you look at our top 25 anyway, I think 8, 9, 10, 11, Miami's 10. And then you got 11 Florida, 12 Tennessee. So a lot of the same schools that they're hard to sort out. So it's hard to say that you're an SEC championship, national championship contender if I can't sort you out from the other 4 teams in your kind of tier that you're talking about.
Sure. I'm with you. We have a lot of similar teams in the top 25 and where they're at here. This is my clump of SEC as well. I had LSU at 8, South Carolina at 9, Alabama was 11, Tennessee was 10, Miami was 12 for me. And so I go through and I look at it, and I'm with you. LSU was the team that was one of our more hot topics of discussion when we released ours, because Brian had LSU at 14th. I had them 8th. And basically what we had talked about was we sorted LSU out based on, we took opposite ends of the spectrum. We believe that LSU will fall somewhere in that 8 to 14 range next season after it's all said and done. I took the higher end of that spectrum, and Brian took the floor of it. But LSU's a weird team for me, because they're one of they have the talent on their roster that they could be an SEC title contender up there with Georgia. But they could also be one of those teams where it's like, all right, well, heading into the second week of November, they're 6-2, and that we don't know how that's going to turn out. One of the things that I did say, having experience, having watched him coach a team for 11 years up close, was Brian Kelly is also just kind of randomly due for one of those good seasons. At Notre Dame, he went 8-5, 8-5, 12-0. And then leading up to the 2018 season, in 2016, he went 4-8. And then he went 9-4. And then he went 12-0. And so it's one of those where, could we see the same thing down in Baton Rouge? It's interesting because one of the other things that we're going to find out very quickly as the season starts is how good is Clemson and how good is LSU. They open the season at Clemson, and that's going to be a really, really fun game. to pay attention to. That one is on Saturday the 30th.
Yeah, you that's the thing. You're on this. I think our top. You'll have to send me yours, but I'm guessing our 25s are very similar because I have them 9, and everything you said. Just to build on that, they were very active in the portal, very active. Other than Ole Miss, maybe the most active team in the transfer portal. You do have Garrett Nussmeier coming back, and he is one of the returning passing leaders, which you take that with a grain of salt. That can just mean that he played in a lot of games and a lot of other quarterbacks left, which there's some truth to that as well. But their early season schedule's everything, man. They play Clemson, they play Florida, they play Ole Miss, and all of that before October 1st. So let's play that out, that they lose to Clemson, Florida, and Ole Miss, and LSU's sitting there with 3 losses before October 1st. It'll get hot there if that happens because of Brian Kelly and the fit matters argument that I always make, that when you plop, a guy from Massachusetts in the South, that it always matters. There's a reason why Dabo Swinney doesn't coach at Michigan State. You know what I mean? Like, fit always matters, and fit matters down there. Though you can make the argument they won with less miles than Nick Saban, but still, Brian Kelly, personality, cringy social media moments. It always gets. They need to learn how to, Trevor. They need to learn how to schedule an opener.
Yeah,
to schedule like Louisiana Tech, schedule UL Monroe in your opener. They haven't won an opener since 2019, which is mind-boggling to me.
Wow.
So they've lost to Mississippi State. They lost to UCLA. They lost to I believe Florida State twice. And then they lose to USC in shocking fashion last year.
Wow.
So they need to schedule just go 1-0, Brian. Start there. Go 1-0. Then you don't have to make a weird, cringy press conference comment or slam on a table. Or he's had some moments in September, and that is not an easy game to open with.
No, definitely not. And with this schedule, I mean, even after October 1st, it doesn't get easier from there. Right out of the bye, you host South Carolina. And then 2 weeks after that, you're hosting Texas A&M. Then you get a bye. Then you play Alabama on the road, and then they end the season at Oklahoma. Now, I don't know what Oklahoma is going to be this season. Right now, that program is on fire a little bit, not in a good way, and so we're going to see what that ends up looking like. But I mean, against that schedule, if Brian Kelly and LSU they eke out a 10-win season at the road or on the road against Clemson, home against Florida, at Ole Miss, at Alabama, home against A&M and South Carolina, I think they're going to be a playoff team. But that's that's where their ceiling is for me. And Alabama is another interesting one because their schedule is also not that easy. They host Wisconsin. They're at Georgia coming off of a bye. They're home against Tennessee. That game, I think, there's going to be a lot of players on that team that remember what happened down at Neyland Stadium this past season. They host Alabama. Their schedule is a little bit easier than what LSU's is. They don't have Texas on here. They don't have Ole Miss on here. They do play at South Carolina, but Bama's going to be another one of those teams for me that I'm going to have my eye on. How do you view them going into this season?
They had a lot of transfer in and out, and you were going to have that. I think as Kalen gets, it's crazy to think that they might be better when Kalen gets his guys that didn't play for Nick Saban. That is an analogy because once you play for Nick Saban, you're playing for another coach. You inevitably, with 18 to 22-year-olds, they probably had some guys check out. That happens. I think quarterback position with Ty Simpson's really interesting. Their receiving core is really good. I mean, around Ryan Williams, they're going to be good there. And I think their defense will be better around Tim Keenan. But you said it, the tough early season schedule. And then the grinder in the SEC. And I think there's probably, if I had to put up a Twitter poll, who has more pressure, BK at LSU or Kalen at Alabama? I would still say Kalen because, you're still the guy that followed the guy, and then I've seen that with, Zook following Spurrier, how quickly it could go wrong. I mean, I guess Ohio State's the only one that they just got it. They just fall into guys, right? How do you go from, Tressel to Meyer? I know the Fickle year was in between. Then you go from Meyer to Day, and it just works out for them. But I think there's a lot of pressure on Alabama this year. And then again, those two are the boom or bust, and then they're sandwiched around kind of the hype teams, Florida and Billy Napier with DJ Lagway. Another team with a brutal September and a brutal schedule. Who's made Florida's schedule the last 2 years? If I was Billy Napier, I'm firing that guy. And then Tennessee and South Carolina, like I said, they got young quarterbacks that we're excited about. Nico Iamaleava, even though they lost to Ohio State, I came away impressed with him. He's a tough kid, taking hits in the cold without Dylan Sampson. Going to continue to get better. And then Lenore Sellers at South Carolina, there's a lot of hype around them. So, that's that interesting, tough to sort out group of SEC teams. And any one of them, like you said, the ceiling's probably, of the 5, Alabama can make a run. I always believe that. The rest of them just feel like playoff teams to me.
Yeah. Of that bunch of the Floridas, of the South Carolinas, I do think Alabama potentially has the highest ceiling. I think bringing back his old offensive coordinator from Washington is going to be huge for them as well. Mm-hmm. Reuniting with him down in Tuscaloosa is going to be a really good piece for that offense. And I love Jalen Milroe. He was an exciting player. He made a lot of fun and exciting plays, especially in the month of September with Alabama. But DeBoer is going to be getting a quarterback under center next year that's more a fit for his scheme and what he's going to be able to do on offense. So that'll be interesting to see as well. The last team that I wanted to touch on kind of in this group too was Miami, because they're the team that I just have no idea how to gauge. They lost a lot of production on offense. I put out a series of articles just talking about all of Notre Dame's opponents and who they lost, who they have coming back, who they acquired in the portal. Miami lost quite a bit. I mean, losing Cam Ward, obviously, but, you lose Xavier Restrepo, you lose Damian Martinez, you lost Isaiah Horton, Elijah Arroyos is gone, and they have to replace their left tackle and their center. And then defensively, they actually have a good amount coming back. They have players coming back at every level on their defense. They have Akeem Messidor coming back, Ruben Baines coming back, OJ Frederick is coming back. So there's going to be some interesting players on their defense. For me, a lot of it surrounds Carson Beck, because I don't know. Look, Miami with a lot of those pieces last year, with Xavier Restrepo, with Damian Martinez, with Cam Ward, they still went 10-2. So a lot of their season and a lot of their success for me lives with Carson Beck. And I think that's an interesting spot for them to be in. I don't know how you view that, Bill, but for me, Miami's ceiling is I think that they're going to be kind of on the fringe of maybe making a playoff, maybe competing for the ACC title again in the month of November. But then I think their floor is they miss it completely. So I don't know where you fall with them.
You don't say the U is back like everybody else does in September when they win a couple games. This is a Bill Trocchi, who obviously we do the other podcast here at Irish, one of the other podcasts is Irish Breakdown. I always bristle at that notion because I was like, they've never won the ACC. Think about that. They've never won the ACC. They've only played for it, I think, once, maybe twice. Which I remember where I was watching. I was at one of my first newspaper jobs on Labor Day, watching them play Florida State when they made this big deal about Florida State and Miami playing in the ACC for the first time. And never played for an ACC. They've never won an ACC championship, which is insane to me in some ways because it's Miami,
It's crazy.
Carson Beck, I'm trying to find the middle ground with him because on one hand, you saw how good he can be, but then he was throwing to Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, who didn't just have good college careers. They were two of the best NFL receivers last year in the league, in the entire league as rookies. So that's a couple dudes. Turned the ball over a little much last year, though. Now does he do what Cam Ward does? Maybe, but there's a lot to that program. They, like you said, you lose some guys. They've relied heavily on the transfer portal. That's a little bit of a game of roulette. Mario Cristobal, I still think jury's out because that should have been a playoff team last year. When anytime you have a Heisman finalist quarterback that could be the number one pick, that's a question you have to ask is, okay, why didn't you make the playoff? They lose Georgia Tech. I'll give them that one. Lose to Syracuse in a shootout. Probably should have lost to Cal. Probably slipped, and they slipped by. Probably should have lost to Virginia Tech. The guy caught the Hail Mary. So is this really turning a corner at Miami, or are they just one of the many ACC teams that Notre Dame has mowed down over the years? And I know what an incredible record they have against the ACC in this arrangement. It's pretty high. So But and I'm also interested to see where they'll be ranked. Miami will probably be ranked around where you and I have them.
I'm going to be interested to see how they go. And the one thing that I will say in the defense of Carson Beck, I'm pretty sure Georgia's receiving core led the nation last year in drops.
Yeah, they did. They
And
had a lot of
so,
drops.
yeah, and so you never know how that turns out for them. But the sample size that we did see from Gunnar Stockton this past season, and some of the issues that Carson Beck had, you compound that with him coming off of a UCL injury, I think it's still a question mark of how ready he's going to be to go against Notre Dame in August. Most
Right.
likely, if I were to bet, he would probably play, but I don't know if he's going to be at full go like he would be in October or November. So the Carson Beck conversation is one that I'm going to keep a close eye on as the season progresses, because I think they have enough talent. They've done enough in the portal that they could make a run. I did not know Miami's never won the ACC.
Isn't that wild?
That's
Like
crazy.
I point it out every year. I'll say that you can tell me the U is back when Miami wins an ACC championship.
Fair enough.
And I'm pretty sure, I'm going to look this up just to be sure while we're here. I'm pretty sure they've only played for an ACC championship one time. And then that was with Mark Richt in that year. And I remember because I went and watched. They've been in the ACC championship game exactly one time. And it was in 2017. And that was a Miami team that I went down and watched them. Notre Dame fans aren't going to want to hear it. I believe I went down and watched them November 11th, 2017. I was at that game. Miami wins 41-8. Destroyed Notre Dame that night down in the Orange Bowl. And again, we're doing the U is back. The U is here. And what happens? 2 weeks later, they lose to Pitt. Then they get destroyed by Clemson. Then they lose their bowl game. So that was the only year where they made the ACC championship game under Mark Richt. And then from there, it's been a lot of spinning wheels. So yeah, if any program has a lot to prove in that top 10, it's probably them.
I agree. I'm with you. It's one of those where I will never say that the U is back until they get that big signature win, until they win the ACC. So I'm with you there. Gosh, that is such a crazy stat. I did not know that. You learn something new every day, Bill. The final part of this segment of the show, do you have any teams in your list or that you're keeping your eye on that could be potential sleeper teams too? And we can separate this into two buckets. I know we're talking about national title contenders, but do you have any sleepers for this upcoming season that have the chance to make the playoffs that not a lot of teams are talking about right now to make the playoffs?
Well, I mean, there's a couple interesting sleepers to me. Illinois would be one. They were that was probably one of the most fun moments of bowl season was the back and forth between Beamer and Bielema. That was I just happened to be in passing. I don't know what I was doing that day, but I did watch that. I think they're one out of the Big Ten. I think Michigan will strike back on a little bit of a level, though the schedule. I just leave them a little bit of room for breathing because one, I don't know if Bryce Underwood will start right away. They could start Mikey Keene. And if they do start Bryce Underwood right away, I think the offense could undergo something in the neighborhood of what Nebraska did with Raiola last year. There's always bumps with five-star guys. Five-star top quarterback doesn't guarantee immediate success. So I think there are a couple out of the Big Ten that could push their way into that kind of where Indiana was last year and be that third or fourth team in that conference. Whoever wins the Big 12, what dart do you want to throw? Do you want to throw it at BYU, Arizona State? I like BYU, what they have coming back. They were close last year, but I think they're fit to make a couple runs in that conference. So they're another team that didn't win the Big 12, certainly stomped Colorado in the bowl game, though. And, that's one of those teams that I've got my eye on that I think they fit well in that conference. And you mentioned Oklahoma, a little off the radar, but John Mateer was a nice pickup. And I know we're going to talk quarterbacks here in a minute. And maybe that gets that team going a little bit because Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins Jr., that just wasn't working. There's some people that love Auburn with Jackson Arnold, who went there, and some of the receivers that Hugh Freeze has. But, Hugh Freeze, obviously, I think I read the other day, dealing with cancer and still going to coach. So, hopefully he has a full recovery. And, but we'll see how that goes. But Auburn's certainly a team in that very large pool of SEC teams that could make it interesting.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, for me, I don't have a ton of sleeper teams. I think that this year it could be a little bit more top heavy. I don't know if an Arizona State emerges like it did this past season. That was such a fun story of 2024. Picked, basically voted on last to finish dead last in their conference, ended up winning the Big 12. Kind of snuck in there towards the end with Kansas State and BYU losing in November. One team that I have my eye on again is Indiana, because they bring back a good amount of players from their season last year. I like Cignetti as their head coach. Defensively, they definitely bring back more than what they brought back on offense. But on offense, they had good portal pickups. They got Roman Hemby from Maryland. The Fernando Mendoza pickup from Cal is interesting, but he still has Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper Jr. to throw to, which are two of their top receivers from last year. They picked up Notre Dame center Pat Coogan, who started 13 games for Notre Dame, picked up Khalil Benson. But on defense, they bring back Mikhail Kamara, which is huge. They bring back Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Amari Farrell, their strong safety. So they did lose a lot, but IU, until Cignetti kind of gets his feet under him a little bit and starts building up those recruiting pipelines, I think that they're just going to be a trial by transfer portal type of team. But it worked for him this past season. So there's somebody that I have my eye on too. I don't know if they repeat the 2024 performance, because I'm pulling up their schedule right now.
A little bit tougher. Yeah.
Yeah.
They've got to Google a couple tougher games next year. You got to figure, is this a default ranking where you have them in the top 25, or is it, is this a built to last, not a 1 year wonder thing? And, there's something to that. I do know next year they do play at Penn State, at Oregon. I believe they play Iowa at Iowa early in the season. So Illinois, who's going to be ranked when they play them. Now they're non-con, not good. Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State. That's 2 FCS teams. So, yeah. But I do, Curt Cignetti was the Eddie Robinson Coach of the Year last year. We had a chance to talk to him in Atlanta, we being reporters. It was good. And I think they made that schedule in advance just trying to get to a bowl game. So I don't think the Indiana schedule makers were trying to go, 11-1 in year one with Cignetti. But this guy, he's good. Yeah. Good program builder, got a little edge to him. I think there's a lot of substance to what he's doing, but it has to come with the recognition of, yes, their schedule was very easy last year. Michigan, if they had a quarterback of any kind, would have beat them.
Yeah.
So, I think they'll face some bumps, but even at 10-2, 9-3, if they can beat the Wisconsins and Iowas and reassert themselves, because the race to me in the Big Ten isn't about Ohio State and Penn State will probably finish 1 and 2. It's that 3 through 7 that's really interesting. Who's going to be 3 and 4, because they're probably going to beat each other up a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Indiana's going to have an interesting schedule ahead of them. I will say, I think they're going to benefit from their experiences. Despite having a light schedule, they played Notre Dame at night at Notre Dame Stadium in a home playoff game. And then they played Ohio State in the Horseshoe as well. I'm not saying that that's going to make them bulletproof to traveling to play at Beaver Stadium and then traveling to play at Autzen Stadium against Oregon. But at least it's not going to be something to where it's just an environment that they've never seen before. But we're going to find out pretty quickly what kind of team IU is going to have this season. I don't think they go. I mean, if IU goes 11-1 against that schedule, then they deserve to host a home playoff game.
Right.
I'll say that.
Right. And you could tell. I was at the Ohio State Indiana game this year, and they weren't ready for that stage. I thought they were a little more ready for Notre Dame, but they were just Notre Dame. Get a turnover at the goal line, and then Love takes off on the big run. They were that experience will help the guys that they have come back. Obviously, quarterback with Mendoza a little bit different, but I'm more impressed with they play together on the defensive end, and having Pons and Fisher in particular back. Those were leaders off that defense last year, and I think that'll continue to grow in Bloomington. They're not going to be the pushover that they are normally, where they have one good year and then they were horrible, which is what happened with Tom Allen.
Yep, absolutely. Bill, any more sleeper teams that you have on the docket before we move on to the next topic?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, we mentioned all the conferences. Out of the group of 5, I think UNLV is going to get a little bit of run with Dan Mullen being there. They worked the portal. They got Alex Orji. They got from Michigan. They got some other guys out of the portal, and I think he'll be trendy. He's a flashy guy. So if you can't, you look at a location for somebody to land, I think he's Dan Mullen at UNLV. The only thing we need to do is get them to play Florida in the first round of the playoffs somehow. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The only other group of 5 team that it comes to mind for me is Navy. They returned Blake Horvath, Eli Heidenreich. They returned Alex Teska. So they returned their top 3 producers on offense this past year. So there's somebody to keep an eye out on. But until shown or proven otherwise, it's going to be difficult. As much as I would love to see it, a service academy make the playoff, but I think it's going to be interesting. There's somebody to keep an eye on next season for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah. And Horvath being a local Central Ohio kid, you always pull for him a little bit. I know he's from nearby Hilliard. So they are a team definitely that when we were sorting out, okay, which group of 5 team do we like off the go? I mean, Boise State will still be good. But Navy's a good pull there, especially with the setup that they have.
Well, all right, guys, that's going to do it for the second part of today's show. Don't go anywhere because we still have the final topic to talk about. We're going to break down the top quarterbacks returning in 2025. But before we get there, guys, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast, whichever platform that you watch this on. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate it, whether that's on Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts. We're going to have some time at the end of today's show. Bill's going to have to get out of here a little bit after 3, but if you guys do have any mailbag questions, I'll stick around and answer some of those. If you guys have any coming in, I know some spring news broke today for Notre Dame. Spring practice is right around the corner. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that you guys have. If not, we'll keep them shared for when Brian returns next week. But if there are enough questions, we will get to some mailbag questions after Bill heads out of here shortly after 3. And as always, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.